Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife used her husband all the time, but to what end? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. This story takes place in high school, although not much actually happened there. The city had 3 elementary schools offering kindergarten through 5th grade and 2 middle schools for grades 6 through 8. There was only one high school that offered grades 9 through 12. So, when I started 9th grade, I saw a ton of kids I'd never seen before, and one of them was Nancy Wilder. I don't know if you remember what it was like when you first saw someone you hoped would be your first love and, hopefully, your only one, but I immediately felt drawn to Nancy. In every class we had together, I sat as close to her as possible and followed her around like a lost puppy. I tried to persuade her to sit with me in the cafeteria during lunch and invited her to every after-school event. I pretty much made a fool of myself around her, and of course, everyone in our class noticed and laughed about it. Unfortunately, one of the people laughing was Nancy. Somewhere in the middle of 10th grade, Nancy decided that I was no longer a joke. I thought it was because she had finally realized what I had known all along, that we were meant for each other. It was only much later that I learned the real reason. Because of my birthday and the school system's age requirements, I was 6 years old when I started kindergarten instead of 5. Then, when I was in the middle of 6th grade, my appendix burst, causing me to miss so much school that I had to repeat 6th grade. As a result, I was 2 years older than the other students in 10th grade, 17 compared to 15. Since I was 17, I had a driver's license and, thanks to my parents who spoiled me, I had a car. This car gave me the freedom to go places and do things my classmates couldn't. These thoughts had never occurred to me until one day when Nancy sat down at my table in the school cafeteria and asked, "You don't like me anymore, Robbie?" I was taken aback. "Like Nancy, why would you even think that?" "You don't ask me out anymore," she said. "I stopped asking because you always told me no." "That doesn't mean I wasn't interested in you." My parents didn't let me date until I was 15, and even then, my mom always said I was too young to be serious about any guy. "You're the only guy I could think about seriously, so I had to keep you at a distance." Looking back, I should have known that was a complete lie, but I was so enamored with her that the fact she was sitting at my table talking to me made it impossible for me to think clearly. I had seen her on dates since we started 10th grade together, but it wasn't until a year later that I finally realized I had been played. Anyway, let's go back to the cafeteria. "So what has changed?" I asked her. "I've seen you with other girls and finally decided that I should make a move before some other girl helps you build a lasting relationship. I've dated a lot, but never with someone I wanted to be with permanently. Do you want to be with me? We won't know until we spend some time together, but in 6 months or a year, I don't want to see you with a steady girlfriend and wish I could have been the one," I said. This was the beginning. I immediately asked her out, and she said yes. I was walking on air. Nancy agreed to go on a date with me, which turned out to be just a movie and root beer at Harry's malt shop. But I was with the girl I wanted to be with forever. On our second and third dates, I was kissed on the cheek. Although it sounds silly, I couldn't stop smiling for 2 days afterward. Then came the weekend when Nancy wanted to go to the lake. I agreed, and she asked if her best friend Bev and her boyfriend could come with us. I said sure. We had a great time, and I took Nancy home afterward. From then on, every date with Nancy was a double date with her friends. I should mention that I had a 9-seater Ford Galaxie 500 station wagon, not the kind of car you typically associate with a teenager, but my parents couldn't resist the price when they were looking for a good used car for me. Shortly after Nancy and I started dating, the car was usually filled with 9 seats, sometimes even 10 or 12, depending on how familiar the passengers were with each other. Nancy was usually the one who chose where we went, and I didn't mind because all I really wanted was to be with her. It never occurred to me that no matter where we went, she spent more time with the others we were with than with me. I know it sounds foolish that it never occurred to me that I was being used because I had a driver's license and a car. It didn't dawn on me until the summer was over and we started 11th grade. That's when my classmates turned 16, got their driver's licenses, and gained access to family cars, and in some cases, their parents bought them cars. I will never forget the date, September 12th. I sat in the school cafeteria, waiting for Nancy to join me. When she arrived, she sat down at the table and said, "I'm really sorry, Rob, but I can't see you anymore. My parents say I'm too serious with you, and it's not good for someone my age to act like that." Then she got up and left. I watched her leave, and to make matters worse, when school let out and I walked out to my car in the student parking lot, I saw Nancy getting into a car with John Woodman. She kissed him and they drove off. I noticed that the car Woodman was driving had temporary tags on it, so it was likely he had just received it. Once they were out of sight, I thought about what I had just seen and began to remember things I had noticed over the summer but hadn't paid much attention to. For example, Woodman was always in the group when Nancy and I went on group dates to the lake or amusement park. Nancy seemed to spend more time with him than with the rest of us. There were a couple of times when Nancy disappeared for a while, and looking back, I couldn't remember Woodman being around while she was gone. Even then, I didn't connect the dots. I was still too attached to Nancy to see clearly what was bothering her. 2 days later, within 48 hours, 2 events occurred that opened my eyes. The first was a rumor among my classmates that Nancy and Woodman were now a couple. This happened on Thursday. On Saturday, I was at a party at Adolph Thomas's house. There were a lot of people smoking there. I didn't smoke, and sometimes the smell got to me, so I usually went outside to get some fresh air. It was just after 6 when Becca Marsh and Audrey Totten came outside, probably for the same reason. They didn't see me leaning against the oak tree by the fence. Normally, I would have made my presence known, but they were talking about me, so I remained quiet and motionless. "Do you think there will be fireworks when Nancy and John get here?" Becca asked. "Wouldn't it be great if Rob attacked the 2 of them?" "I just can't understand it," Audrey said. "Rob is too good a guy. It's a shame he's so clueless about Nancy. I know I'd like to have a guy I like deeply. Do you think he's realized how much she was playing him, just using him until John got his license and a car?" "I doubt it," Becca replied. "I don't think he can have bad thoughts about Nancy. He's been crazy about her since 9th grade. What a waste. I don't know why he never realized what a manipulative person she is. He has no idea that she and John have been dating all week. From what I heard, she told him her parents don't allow her to date during the week, and since Rob works a part-time job during the week, he'll probably never have a chance to catch them. It's a shame he's so infatuated with Nancy. I'd really like to go somewhere with him, and not just because he has a car." "I know what you mean," Audrey said. But he was so engrossed in Nancy that he didn't even notice the rest of us. As I listened to them, my feelings for Nancy died a slow death. I came out of the shadows and said, "You are absolutely right. I didn't know anything, but what I don't understand is why you guys, who are supposed to be my friends, never told me." My appearance took them by surprise and silenced them. I turned away from them and headed back into the house. I put my hand on the doorknob when Audrey shouted, "Wait, Rob." I turned to them, and Audrey said, "That's because we're your friends. We never talked to you about this because you were so enthralled with Nancy that you wouldn't have believed us and would have most likely cut us off. We all hoped you would cope without our intervention." I turned and entered the house. Once inside, I saw Nancy and John arrive. I could really feel the tension in the room. Everyone must have expected me to react strongly, so I don't know if they were relieved or disappointed when I walked up to Adolph and said, "Great party, but I have to go. Thanks for the invitation. See you at school on Monday." I was halfway home before it all hit me, and I had to stop and park. I exploded and cried my eyes out. It was half an hour before I could bring myself to start the car and drive the rest of the way home. Since Monday at school, I've noticed that John and Nancy seem to go out of their way to avoid me. I just tuned them out and moved on with my life. I looked around and noticed that some of my classmates weren't in relationships, so I started dating. I received partial compensation as far as Nancy and Woodman were concerned. It was a Saturday in the first week of October, and a whole group of us went out to the lake. We hung out until the sun started to set. As the weather grew colder, people began to leave. There was a float about 100 yards offshore, and knowing it would be unlikely that I would be able to make it out there until next summer, I swam to it, lay on my back, and just looked at the stars for a while. When I returned to the beach, I found that everyone except Nancy and Woodman had left. Woodman's car was about 30 feet from mine, and as I walked up to my car, I saw them both standing there, looking at his deflated right rear wheel. I got into my car and started it, but before I could drive off, Woodman approached me. I rolled down the window, and he said, "I have a problem, Rob. I have a flat tire and no spare." Before he could say anything else, I replied, "Gee, John, that's too bad," and drove away, leaving them in the dark, 10 miles from the nearest telephone. Over the next 15 years, I went to college, got a good job, but ended up alone. I dated a lot, had an intimate quite a few times, but never found a girl I wanted to commit to. That all changed when the company I worked for was bought out by a much larger corporation. Naturally, everyone began to worry because it was well known what usually happens when one company acquires another, and everyone wondered how safe their jobs were. The transition team arrived, and everything began to change. I must say, the changes were mostly for the better. You know how it goes, every company usually has some deadwood, people who got where they are by kissing up and taking credit for the work of others. We had more than our fair share, and the team must have done their homework because by the end of the second week, the deadwood was gone. My boss was one of them, and to my surprise, I was transferred to his position after the reorganization and the launch of the new computer system. We were visited by our new CEO and his entourage, and the transition team leader showed them around. I was in production, talking with the shift supervisor when the group approached me. I was introduced to Mr. Coleman, his 2 vice presidents, and his personal assistant, Mrs. James. Mrs. James was a knockout, and I immediately disliked Mr. James, even though I had never met him. This woman was to die for, and I hated this man because he had her and I didn't. The group moved on, and when she left, I couldn't take my eyes off her. Mike Ears, the shift supervisor, hit me on the arm and said, "Earth to Rob, come in, Rob." I turned to him, smiled, and replied, "She definitely has your attention, doesn't she?" Then I went back to work. Later, I was in my office working on reports when the door opened, and Mrs. James walked in without invitation. She sat down in the chair on the other side of my desk and said, "I just came from HR, and according to your file, you are not married. Do you have a significant other?" "Sorry, a fairly simple question. Are you single, or do you have a wife or girlfriend?" I decided that if she was being so persistent, I would see if I could get her to reveal a bit more. So I said, "I have a couple of friends with benefits but no permanent attachments." "Fine. I wouldn't want to be responsible for the separation of a committed couple. So, where are we going on our first date? And FYI, I don't like seafood." "First date?" I replied. "Sorry, but I don't mess with married women." "It's good to know, but I'm not married. I'm a widow." "Sorry to hear that. My condolences. My dearly deceased Herbert died in a car accident while with his mistress." Looking at her, I remembered the thoughts that arose when I met her and decided to go for it. "It just so happens that I have no plans for this evening. If you're free." "Surprisingly, I have the evening free," she said. She opened her purse, took out a piece of paper, and handed it to me. I looked at it and saw directions to her house. I looked at her, then turned to the paper and said, "Were you that confident in me? I saw the way you looked at me, and after reading your file, I decided it was worth the risk." "What time?" 6:30, and dress more casually, jeans or trousers will do. See you." "Oh, by the way, my name is Judith, but I prefer Judy," she said and then got up and left. As she walked to the door, I watched her gorgeous figure and wondered why Herbert would cheat on someone so captivating. Whatever the reason, I was captivated by Mrs. James's allure and intrigued by her no-nonsense approach. I just had to see where things could go. When I picked Judy up at 6, I was impressed with her house and the area. Between the two of them, Herb and Judy must have been very well compensated for their jobs. The woman looked like night personified in her tight, low-cut top. The top was tied in a knot just below her breasts, and the jewel in her navel drew attention to her flat stomach. She was barefoot when she invited me in, led me into the living room, and pointed to the sofa. I walked over and sat down. She said, "I was waiting for you to get here before I decided which shoes to wear." She reached into her bag on the coffee table and pulled out a tennis shoe and a pair of strappy high heels. In truth, tennis shoes would have been more practical for what I had in mind, but high heels have always turned me on, so I smiled and said, "Heels." She laughed and said, "For some reason, I thought you'd say that." She sat down, put on the heels, then stood up and slowly turned around in front of me. "Good enough to go out in public, and good enough that if we knew each other better, we wouldn't even leave the house," she said with a laugh, giving me a megawatt smile. Okay, this is exactly the image I was looking for. I took her to Bud's bar. Bud's had the best half-pounder in the state, at least in my opinion, and my plans for the evening were simple: grab some food and drinks while sitting in a booth and talking to get to know each other better. That plan quickly changed when we were just a stone's throw from Bud's front door. "Oh, well done," Judy exclaimed. "They have pool tables." We had a tour of the grounds and a few drinks, but we spent very little time sitting in a booth and talking. I've always considered myself a pretty good player at the pool table, but Judy could give a professional hustler a run for his money. She was about to kick my 5th place for the 3rd time when a couple of my friends and their wives walked in. We all ended up at 2 tables pushed together, playing doubles on the pool table. After a while, we stopped playing and sat down to have a drink and talk. Although I could see that Ben, Jerry, and their wives, Clara and Brenda, were eager to ask questions, the conversation was general until Judy got up to go to the ladies' room. In some strange ritual that we mere men will never understand, Clara and Brenda stood up to go with her. I never understood this. Guys don't get up and go to the bathroom together. The girls were barely out of sight when Ben said, "Geez, Rob, where did you find her?" Jerry added, "I saw you in the locker room at the gym, and I know that's not true. I have a rough idea of how much you make, so I know that can't be true either. So how in the hell did you manage to land someone like that?" Honestly, I don't know. One day, I was sitting in my office, minding my own business, and she came in, sat down across from me, and said, "I want you." I took one look and decided to give her what she wanted. "Yeah, right," Ben said. Jerry continued, "I'm not drunk enough to believe it yet. She's just a woman who works at the same company as me, and this is our first date. Calling her just another woman is like calling the Hope Diamond another stone. If you let her go, I'll leave Clara and go after her myself." I knew Ben was full of crap because Clara had him wrapped around her little finger, but this conversation reminded me of something that had been on my mind ever since Judy came into my office. I've never been one to pretend to be something I'm not. I'm just an average guy, average in everything. In short, there's nothing special about me, whereas Judy certainly is. So the question becomes, why me? Why did she choose me? It didn't make any sense to me. The girls returned to the table, and Clara said, "Sorry it took so long, but it took a while to make plans." "What are your plans?" In fact, there are several plans. The first is a barbecue we're having on Sunday to introduce Judy to all our friends. This will be followed by a couple of parties, the timing of which we're not entirely sure of yet. I looked from Judy to Clara and then back to Judy. She gave me the same megawatt smile she gave me earlier at her house. It turns out I was planning a barbecue, and if I wanted to keep seeing that smile, I'd better keep my mouth shut and stick to the program. I also noticed the looks Clara and Brenda were giving me, but I couldn't decipher them. I looked at my watch, saw the time, and said, "I hate partying, but I have a workday tomorrow, and I need to go home and get some sleep." "I hate to tell you this, buddy," Jerry said, "but sleep won't do you any good." "I don't know about that," Judy said. "After all, beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Brenda laughed and said, "Amen." As I drove Judy home, she said that she liked my friends and was looking forward to seeing them at the barbecue. In the 9 hours since Judy sat down in my office and then got into my car to drive back to her home, my curiosity grew stronger. I decided that the way to satisfy this curiosity should be as simple as she seemed to be. I took the bull by the horns and said, "It's time to tell me what's going on here, Mrs. James." "What do you mean?" "You know damn well what I mean. What made you go into HR, pull out my file, and then plop down in my office and ask me where we were going on our first date?" "You'll laugh if I tell you." "It's quite possible, but so what? I'm guessing that so far everything is going the way you wanted, and I'm not upset about it. So I highly doubt that my laughter will change anything. Let me ask you something. Do you believe that there really can be something like love at first sight?" "I not only believe in it, but I have experienced it myself. Unfortunately, this was only on my part. The girl in question did not return the feeling. That must have sucked big time. So you're saying you fell in love with me when you first saw me? I don't know whether it was love at first sight or not. What I do know is that when I first saw you, my first thought was, I just have to meet this man. I've never felt anything like this toward any other man, not even with my deceased, unmourned husband when we first met. One of my character traits is to go after what I want, so I came for you. And what's the next step in your plan? Oh no, Robbie, the next step is up to you. You know where I come from. Now we need to see where you want to go. I think we both know the answer to this question. You said you noticed my reaction when I first saw you, but I need to let you know in advance that I'm not a weakling. You'll have to work hard for this. Isn't that my line? Maybe 20 years ago, but this is a new century. Men and women should now be equal. I see that I will have to work hard if I intend to make you obey. That will never happen. Any partnership I enter into will be equally divided. Okay, enlightened person, what's next? Where would you like to go and what would you like to do tomorrow evening? It's up to you. No, that's not true. We need to get to know each other better and understand each other's likes and dislikes. Tonight was my choice, so tomorrow is yours. I'll figure out what to do on Saturday, and you've already taken care of Sunday. After that, we'll see. When I got her home, I walked her to the door and thanked her for a fun evening. She hugged me and kissed me. She looked at me and said, I'm not simple and I'm not a woman of easy virtue, but we both know where we want to go. Do we really have to waste time dancing? Are you sure about this? I'm quite sure. What does it matter? I've lusted after you from the first moment I saw you, so why not? Either it will work or it won't, and even if it doesn't, at least I get a taste. She showed me the way, took my hand, and led me into the house and straight to the bedroom. We made love. As I started to get up, she asked, Where are you going? Home. I need to shower before work. You can take a shower here. I could, but all my clothes are at home. I can't go to work in jeans and a polo shirt. But I wanted to cuddle up to you and sleep with you. I wanted to wake up in your arms. Next time. What time should I pick you up this evening? How about 6? Dress casually. On the way home, I wondered what had happened to Herbert James. He had a stunningly beautiful wife who was a tiger in bed. Why did he stray? Was this a character flaw or something Judy forced him into? I really hoped that Herbie was the problem because I was already under Judy's spell. The next day at work was so busy that Judy didn't even cross my mind. At least, I didn't think about her until late in the evening. At 3, my secretary called and said she had Mrs. James on the line and asked if she should put her through. Iris had a doctor's appointment that day, so she had no idea who Mrs. James was. I think you're better off if you like your job. Mrs. James is Mr. Coleman's personal assistant. And you know who Mr. Coleman is, don't you? Got it, boss. 3rd line. I picked up the phone and said, I hope you're not calling to cancel. Of course not, but I need to change the time. I have a meeting and won't leave here until 4 to 6. Can you pick me up at 7? See you at 7. Kisses, dear. I kind of liked it. I picked her up at 7 and asked where to. City Center, corner of Talbot and 6th Streets. I drove towards the city center and asked, How was your meeting? It was fruitful, I have to admit. I wonder what a personal assistant does. To be honest, I'm a glorified secretary. I just don't sit at a desk all the time. I travel with my boss wherever he goes, take notes on who says what and what he sees and comments on. I keep track of the time in his schedule, and if he needs to be somewhere at a certain time, I just follow him. I feel like you're downplaying it, but it sounds important even if you're shading things a little. Next question, where are we going? We're going to the corner of Talbot and 6th Streets, where we'll have some chilled wine and look at things. That doesn't tell me much. You were the one who said we need to get to know each other better. I just want to see your reaction when we get to where I'm taking you. When we got to the corner of Talbot and 6th Streets, I followed her to the Ashland Art Gallery. Entering the door, she said, The girl I know from the gym where I train is an artist and she has a show here this weekend. I wanted to come and offer some support. Before I could say anything, a very attractive redhead walked into the room, saw me, and screamed, "Rob." Then she ran up to me, hugged me, and kissed me on the cheek. I returned the hug. "I didn't know you were coming." I didn't know either until my partner walked me through the door. Apparently, in her haste to greet me, she did not pay attention to my companion. She looked at Judy, her eyes widened. "Judy?" She looked from Judy to me and then back to Judy. "Do you know Rob?" "I'm trying to get to know him better." "I think I can trust that you know him." "Mel and I went to school together," I said. "I take it Mel is the artist we came to see?" "She is," Mel said. "I'll meet you later, but right now I need to chat." She walked up to the couple who had just entered. "Did you go to school together?" "Not really. We went to the same college at the same time, but we didn't take classes together." "Then how did you meet?" "I needed money, and there was a notice on the board that the art department needed a couple of male models. So I signed up. That's where I met Mel." "Is this an old flame I have to worry about?" "Not at all. She's just a friend. And it's true that last I knew, she was engaged. Our friends with benefits relationship ended when Mel told me she had met someone she thought she could go a long way with." Judy and I walked around, looking at the art on the walls and easels. Suddenly, Judy stopped, looked at a photo, and said, "It's you." I looked at it, and indeed, it was me in the picture. The title of the painting was "Without Anything at Repose," and it was essentially a version of Modigliani's famous Reclining Without Clothes, with a male figure instead of a female one. "Has she seen you without clothes?" "Along with 17 other art students." "I'm jealous." At that moment, Mel came up and said, "Do you like my favorite model?" Judy giggled and asked, "How much?" "I have the perfect place to hang it." "Sorry, friend, but it's not for sale. I only show it at shows because I often have to double him using my husband or boyfriend instead of Rob. This is a good source of income." Some woman came and took Mel away, and they left. When Mel was gone, Judy looked at me and said, "My feminine instincts tell me that she won't sell this because of a personal attachment to the painting, or maybe to the model." No, as far as I understand, this was many years ago and in the past. Mel and I dated for a few years, but we both realized that the only place we were compatible was in bed. Outside of being friends and having profitable relationships, we weren't going anywhere. From the gallery, we went to Duke's Steakhouse for dinner. Since neither of us had to work the next day, we went to the pit for drinks and dancing. When I drove her home and walked her to the door, she put the key in the lock, turned around, hugged me, and kissed me. Ready to repeat last night? I looked into her eyes and realized that I would not let her go. I was with her, and I needed to make sure that she wanted to keep me. I smiled and said, "Still would." Over breakfast, she said, "I've already had a big wedding and all the fuss that goes with it, and I'd rather not do it all again, unless that's the route you want to go." This took me by surprise, and I said, "Are you speaking too prematurely? We don't even know each other that well." "True, but I know myself well enough to know what I want in a man, and I know you fit the bill. You told me that you know what it's like to feel love at first sight, so you know how I feel now. The only question now is how much time you want to spend getting to know me better." "I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see." Ben and Clara's barbecue was an eye-opener. As announced, all my friends were present to meet my new girl, and they all seemed fascinated by her. Mara Bing cornered me and said, "Don't be stupid, Rob. Lock her up before you lose her." Ben and Jerry pulled me aside about an hour into the affair. Ben asked, "When's the bachelor party?" "What the hell are you talking about? Remember that evening when we met you at Bud's? When Clara told us about the barbecue and a couple of parties that hadn't been decided yet?" "Yes, I remember. Judy told the girls in the bathroom that she would marry you as soon as she could get you to pull your head out of your fifth place and propose. They were talking about your bachelor party and Judy's wedding party. It didn't take long. 3 weeks later, I gave up the fight. I gave in on Sunday, and she said, 'What does Friday sound like?' We will get our license and blood tests done tomorrow, and the 3-day waiting period will end on Thursday. On Friday, we can do that at City Hall. Sounds good. There's only one thing left to do, and this will happen. It's a little old-fashioned, but you need to ask Daddy for my hand in marriage. You're kidding, right? Do I need to go to a man I don't know yet and ask him for permission to marry you? Don't worry, darling. Dad is a cat C. I already told him that I will marry you. It's just a formality, baby. Well, if I have to, I think I can do it. Fine. We'll have dinner with him tomorrow. Have you really thought this through? What if your father doesn't like me when he sees me? What if he doesn't like what he sees so much that he tries to get you to kick me to the curb? Never, my love. I have you and I will keep you. You are my man forever. I met Judy at City Hall on Monday, and we applied for a license. Then we went to the clinic for blood tests, after which we went to my place and abandoned her car. On the way to Mario's restaurant, I told her that I was a little nervous about meeting her father. I'm not particularly nervous about meeting him, but what if he doesn't like me? What if he refuses? If he says no, we will still get married. As I said, this is just a formality. Dad knows me, and he knows very well that I am going to become your wife. Even if he hates you at first sight, he'll suck it up. If he doesn't, he'll lose me, and he knows it. I already told him I'll be yours for the rest of our lives. As far as I'm concerned, we arrived at the restaurant and took a table in the back. We ordered drinks, and I admit I was a little nervous waiting for her dad to show up. I had to wonder what he thought about his only child telling him she was going to marry a man she had known for less than a month. Judy snapped me out of my thoughts when she said, "Dad is here." I looked at the door and then back at Judy with a confused look on my face. James Coleman, the man whose corporation I worked for, headed towards our table. Judy looked at me and smiled. "Dad already knows who you are, so you're not a surprise to him." "Well, he's a surprise to me," I said in an annoyed tone. Her smile faded a little, but before another word could be said, her father was already sitting at our table. I stood up, extended my hand to him, and shook it. He said, "Do you mind if I call you Rob? I've heard so much about you lately that I feel like I already know you." "Not at all, sir," I replied. "Judging by the expression on your face, the princess didn't warn you." "Princess?" "My favorite name for my daughter." "You're right, sir, she didn't prepare me for this at all." "Drop that word, sir, son. Call me Jim." I looked at Judy and said in a slightly sarcastic tone, "You need to do something, princess. I had to wait until I was sure I had you hooked before letting you meet Daddy. I didn't mean to scare you away, then it came out." Judy was not her father's personal assistant, she was his stunt double. She performed the duties of a personal assistant, but her real function was to learn everything about the business so that when the time came, she could step in and take the reins. Judy's father and I got along well, and after the orientation dinner, we saw each other frequently over the next 3 days. I officially asked him for my daughter's hand in marriage, and he agreed with a laugh. Once the formalities were over and I knew who Dad was, things got a little confusing as we discussed a few things leading up to Friday's wedding at City Hall. For example, when I categorically refused to take a position in the company that was more suitable for the wife of the boss's daughter, I absolutely said no. I was getting promotions based on my performance, and Jim laughed and said, "Judy told me that would be your answer." Another case was when I insisted on a prenuptial agreement. I didn't want anyone to think I was marrying Judy for her money. Last but not least, I refused to give up my apartment and move into Judy's house. My argument was that I didn't want to live in a house that still had all the memories of her previous husband. I wanted a place where we could create our own memories. In the end, I got my way. We got officially married, spent a week in Cabo on our honeymoon, and then returned home and started building our lives together. The next 6 years were wonderful. Judy and I fit together like a hand in a glove. We were both interested in the same things, and our personal life could only be described as fantastic. The only part of our marriage that I cared about was her work. She had to travel with her father, and it killed me to be away from her, even if it was just for a day or two. Then I lost her. She and her father flew to Dallas to negotiate a contract, and on the way back, the charter plane disappeared from the radar screen. When the wreckage was finally found, there were no survivors. Judy was her father's sole heir, and because I belonged to Judy, I became the president and CEO of Culminate Industries. Luckily for me, Jim Coleman had great people, and it took me 2 years working with them before I felt comfortable in the job. 3 years after the acquisition of Culminate Industries, things got interesting when I saw her. It was the company Christmas party. I was sitting at the table with Harley Cox, his wife Estelle, and my 2 other vice presidents and their wives. Harley was vice president of human resources. I took pride in knowing the names of all my employees, so I turned to Harley and asked, "Who's that man at the table with Bev, Phil Gates, Rich, and Marge Holbrook?" "This is Spencer Norman. He transferred from Denver to take Tidwell's place when Sam retired. He's only been here for a little over 3 weeks, so it's unlikely you would have met him before. I take it he's showing promise since he was transferred and promoted? I expect him to be one of your vice presidents one day." "That's good. Do you remember that issue we had at our factory in Denver? You told me that this needed to be taken care of or you would write off the plant." I said in vain, "Do the needful." He appointed Norman as manager, and within 3 months, his production was running like a Swiss watch. When I asked Tidwell for a list of people he could recommend as his replacement, there was only one name on the list he gave me, Spencer Norman. After the meal, the almost obligatory speeches, and while the group was gathering, I walked around, looked around, and socialized. I stopped at Bev and Phil's table and wished them happy holidays. Then I turned to Norman and said, "I don't believe I've met you." Phil introduced us, and Norman said, "And this is my wife, Nancy." I looked at her and didn't smile as I said, "It's been a long time, Nancy." "How much time has passed?" 12 or 13 years. She didn't smile either when she said, "Approximately." I was told that the group was quite good, so you will all enjoy the evening. I left them to visit with the others. As was my habit, I danced at least once with my coworkers' wives, including the wives at Phil's table, all but one. I asked Bev to dance, and when I brought her back to the table, I asked Marge to dance. As I walked Marge back to the table, I saw that Nancy was already prepared for me to ask her, but I didn't. I thanked Marge for the dance and then turned and left. For the rest of the evening, whenever I looked in her direction, I found Nancy looking at me, and I wondered what she was thinking. I bet I know what everyone else at the table is thinking. He knows her but didn't stay and talk to her. He danced with Bev and Marge but ignored her. I had no doubt that Nancy had received the 3rd degree from the others at the table. I smiled to myself, wondering what Nancy had told her husband about our past. Did she tell him the truth or brush him off by saying we were classmates in high school? Unexpectedly, I received an answer to this question. It was a week after the Christmas party when my secretary called me on the intercom to say that Mr. Norman was in the office and wanted to know if I had a few minutes to spare. It was a slow day. I didn't have anything planned, and I had to admit that I was a bit curious, so I asked Stella to send him in. I stood up to greet him, shook his hand, and told him to sit down. "What can I do for you, Mr. Norman? You can reassure me about my future here, or lack thereof. I'm sorry, but your attitude towards my wife at the party was a little cold, and it caught my attention." I naturally asked her about it. It took a while to get it out of her, but I finally got the whole story. "I'm human enough to worry about whether your animosity toward Nancy will affect my chances of advancement here at Coleman. Mr. Norman, may I call you Spencer?" "I prefer Spence." "Okay, Spence." Meeting Nancy brought back long-buried memories, but any feelings I have for Nancy are personal and in no way related to Coleman Industries. My employees, all my employees, are judged on their merits. You are doing your job and working to the best of your ability, and that is what is taken into account when it comes to career advancement. All decisions here are based solely on what's best for the company. I knew that when he left my office, he still had doubts, but that was just a human opinion. I could only hope that his doubts would cause a little disturbance in Norman's house. I wouldn't mind at all if he took it out on Nancy when what he wanted or hoped for didn't happen. Was I, eh? I bet I was. Like that, I owed that for what she did to me. I never expected to get my payback, but the gods must love me because they placed it where I could get to it. Over the next 2 years, I saw Spencer and Nancy a dozen times at various company social events and went out of my way to avoid Nancy while socializing with everyone else at the event. During this period, 2 positions were open for which Spencer applied, but they went to other people. Not that he wasn't a good fit for them, he was, but Harley and I decided that the job just wasn't right for him. In fact, it was Harley who pointed out that Spencer was the perfect candidate for Axel Martin's position when Axel resigned, and it didn't make sense to promote him to the position only to fire him from it. When Axel left, we didn't tell Spencer about this, and I'm sure he thought he was being passed over because of my history with his wife. I smiled as I imagined how he might have felt about Nancy if he hadn't gotten the promotion he thought he deserved. However, he received promotions and bonuses that prevented him from running away and going elsewhere. A month passed after he didn't get the latest promotion. When we had a company picnic, Spence and Nancy were there, and as usual, I ignored Nancy while interacting with everyone else. 2 hours into the event, I had to go to the bathroom, and when I came out, I found Nancy waiting for me. She got straight to the point. "Why are you criticizing what I did to my husband? He hasn't done anything to you to deserve what you're doing to him." Even though it wasn't true, I couldn't help but say, "How else can I get payback for what you did to me in high school? You have no idea how much you hurt me. For God's sake, Robert, grow up." This was years ago, and we were both dumb teenagers. Didn't you ever do anything stupid back then? I'm sure I did, but I never intentionally hurt anyone. On the other hand, you knew how I felt about you, and you led me on, knowing full well that you were going to kick me to the curb as soon as I could be useful. It wasn't just stupid, Nancy, it was rude, and I didn't deserve it. I left her with a smile on my face. For her to approach me like that, there must have been some undercurrent in her personal life caused by comments her husband made when he didn't get the promotion he thought he should have. Fast forward to the office Christmas party. There were rumors that Axel Martin would retire at the end of the year and speculations about who would be promoted to fill his vacancy. Spencer Norman and Andy Baxter were rumored to be the top choices, with Bill Newbert a distant third. Halfway through the party, Nancy was again waiting for me when I came out of the bathroom. Before she could say anything, I said, "We must stop having these meetings, Nancy. It might spark conversations." She didn't catch the humor and asked, "Can you spare a few minutes of your time alone?" I said, "I guess," and led her down the hall into the storage room. Once inside, I said, "This is as private as it can get at this point. What happened? What can I do to help you decide that my husband should get Axel's position?" I smiled and said, "How far are you willing to go?" "As much as I have to." "Really?" "Yes, Rob. Justice. What if I said I wanted what you pushed me to want and what I would get when we dated?" I expected her to say, "I am ready to do it." I didn't bother to question her motivation. I just assumed that her husband would be angry at her if he didn't get the promotion, and she didn't want that to happen. On the other hand, perhaps she loved him enough to make the sacrifice. I didn't know why she made this offer, I just saw it as a gift from the gods. Since it was Friday night, I said, "Take the weekend to think about whether you really want to do this. Call me on Monday and let me know." "I don't have to think about it. I've already decided to do it." I gave her my cell phone number, and we went back to the party. I spent the weekend wondering if she would actually call me on Monday and tell me she was following through. I doubted it. This doubt was dispelled when she called me at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday. "I really didn't think you'd call. I told you my decision has already been made. How do you want to do it? I can leave work whenever I want, and I figure since you're the boss, you can, too." "Agreed. Do you have a cell phone?" "Yes." "Give me the number. I'll set it up and call you back." She gave me her number, and when she hung up, I called the downtown Hilton and booked room 5002 for noon the next day. I called Nancy back and gave her the information. "They are waiting for you, so get the key from the front desk and go to your room." I highly doubted that Nancy remembered or even knew that 5002 was the numeric part of the license plate on my old Ford. I wondered how long she would wait in this room before calling me and asking where I was. She showed much more patience than I would have. They called me only at 3:15. "Where are you?" "In my office." "Why?" "Because I'm not in. I don't sleep with other people's wives." and I hung up. The decision to appoint Spencer to Axel's position was made several months ago, and he will be informed of this before leaving the office this afternoon. He might have had the pleasure of telling Nancy about it when he got home. When I hung up, I knew that I would spend many nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what it would be like to have a girl who owned me for so many of my younger years. I could handle it. What do you think of our story today? If I were my husband, I would feel sorry and very hurt if I were used in this way. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.